Hello everyone, you are listening to episode 3 of Bass Tunes. I am Aryan Salimi, and today we are going to be talking about my favorite album of all time, My Bloody Valentine's Loveless, the Shoegaze killer. Now, obviously, we can go ahead and turn this down a bit. I'm not sure if that's working right or not, but you know what? It doesn't matter. Because through my headphone output, I am hearing something totally different in terms of like the, I don't hear the vocals from Belinda Butcher, one of the lead singers of the album. So, let's just get right into it. This album was released in 1991, and it was a shoegaze album. Now, I gotta explain what that is, so let's get into it. Shoegaze is a subgenre of independent, like indie/alt rock, and is known for its loud volume, its filling wall of sound made up of effects-heavy guitars using distortion, tremolo, and flanger, which creates this drony atmosphere. It also has obscured and often androgynous vocals. One thing I'll say about Loveless, it's got that down pat. Now, it's inspired by bands such as the Jesus and Mary Chain, Sonic Youth, and like Dinosaur Jr., which were sort of noisier rock bands in the earlier 80s. Personally, I'm not a fan of Jesus and Mary Chain that much. You might know them from the movie Lost in Translation, which I quite enjoyed. I might talk about that another time. But their song Just Like Honey is the one you probably know from the album Psycho Candy. And they're primarily British, from the UK. Specifically, My Bloody Valentine is Irish, but I guess they're part of the United Kingdom. There's a lot of debate about that. Didn't Northern Ireland try to have an election to become an independent country outside of the United Kingdom? I'm not sure. I don't pay attention to much politics, especially ones that aren't American. Not that I got problems with that, of course. It's just I focus on my own. What'll affect me, especially because I'm the one who has to vote for these people now that I'm an adult. But other bands known in the genre, aside from My Bloody Valentine, are stuff like Slow Dive, Ride, Lush, Chapter House, and Swerve Driver, and they're often lumped in with dream pop, such as Cocktail Twins, Galaxy 500, and stuff like that. Although the terms were sort of interchangeable at the heyday of shoegaze, nowadays dream pop is something like, I'd say like Beach House is a big one. They actually put out a new album, I believe either last year or like earlier last month, this year, right? And the reason why the name was even given was because people in this sort of genre of music, when they were performing, they would look at their shoes because they had to look at all the effects pedals, which were down by their feet, to get all the tunings and stuff, all the cool effects. And obviously, sorry to keep this down. I am not certain about how loud I should be in music. But the scene was known as the scene that celebrates itself, in the sense that people in the genre, they would collaborate with each other, they'd support each other. It wasn't really competition. They got love for each other, and that's great. But in the mid-90s, the British press, their opinions were shifting, even 1993, as self-indulgent and pretentious, and new types of music, like grunge from the Atlantic. Nirvana's Nevermind came out around this time, and that thing went nuts. And Britpop in the UK with artists like Blur, Oasis, and Pulp, which I might talk about Pulp. What is that? Sometimes. Hold up. Man, I am not sure about that. Whatever. You're not meant to listen to this. It's just background noise. It doesn't really matter. And a lot of shoegaze artists like Ride and Lush sort of shifted to Britpop on their latter albums in an attempt to stay relevant, which is really interesting to me. Like, Lush's last album was, I believe it was called Love Life, and that one was very Britpop, and actually had their biggest song on there called Lady Killers, which I quite like. It's like this sort of, I wouldn't say feminist anthem, but it's like this song sung in this very biting way towards men. I really like it. Even I'm literally driving with like just manly men in the car, and we're just blasting this song, you know, not really being nice, not very having the highest opinion of dudes. It's kind of cool, you know, different perspective. But that all happened. Now, in the lead up to this album, the band My Bloody Valentine formed in 1983, and they sort of shifted around their sounds and performers in the band a lot, although Kevin Shields was always at the front of it. He's sort of the guy doing most of the actual conceptualizing. But around the late 80s, they settled on Belinda Butcher as their main vocalist, who you probably heard. I'm not sure what's going on in the air here, but she's singing on this song. I can kind of hear it still. It's awesome. But their debut studio album, Isn't Anything, released in 1988. After the big success of their EP, You Made Me Realize, which was a big departure from their earlier, more noise rock influenced sound. It was a much more enigmatic and something new, something different, which is awesome. And the label wanted their debut studio album to reflect the current live sound, so Isn't Anything came out, and it was a major success compared to their releases. Now, personally, Isn't Anything is a lot sparser. It's more traditional in like gothic and punk elements. It's less wall of sound, and some of the song, you know what I mean? It's different. It's not as a cohesive product, but there's some pretty good songs on there, although I'm not a fan of the mixing. It did came out in the late 80s, so what can I say, right? And here's the really interesting thing about Loveless. It began work in early 1889, although that does make sense for Kevin Shields, 1989, but it took until 1991 to complete, because essentially the band, and mostly Shields, would be having a lot of trouble dealing with different recording studios, wanting all this stuff. They wanted the perfection, and the label was spending as much money as they could. And they didn't have that much money. Creation Records, Alan McGee was the head of it. And people on I think it was a magazine, on an article on the magazine Melody, I believe it was Melody Machine. I am so... Anyways, an article hit their sound as how much? 250,000 pounds. But the band itself, Shields at least, disputed that, saying the maximum amount of money on just paying for different studios and interns and all that would be 160,000 pounds, which is still a lot for an album. And the thing is, they weren't working on it for the entirety of the time. They were sort of doing it in chunks, starting and stopping, and oh yes, I love this one. Anyways. They would like do one chunk here, and then 6 months later they go back to it. So sort of this start and stop thing, and Shields himself said it only really took about 6 months of work in those 2 years to really make this thing. And the album, when it released, wasn't a commercial success, but it was critically acclaimed on release, and in later years has been sort of hailed as the best album of this subgenre. Now, why is it? What does this album do to people? Well, I'll get you that in a second. The thing I can say about this album is it's narcotic. It's sludgy. There's this thick, impenetrable wall of sound, as I said, which is very characteristic to the genre of shoegaze. But this thing, man, it just fills your ears. You are immersed in these... You got synesthesia, man? You'll love this. Colors and sounds, and what I love is outside of just the grinding noise of these guitars, there's melody and there's decent pop writing in here, even if it's so subdued, with vocals that are basically impossible to understand and lyrics that aren't even available. They had lyrics on streaming. They took them down. Why? Because they didn't want you to know. Lyrically, it's pretty simple. We'll get to that later. Sonically, I think this album really is about the topic of the title, Loveless. It's that sort of sludgy, butterflies in your stomach uncomfortability of this, like, just this rush, that sort of lust and attraction that makes your head spin. And you're drowning in it, and you're drowning in this sound. And you're drowning in this emotion, and it clouds your thoughts and all that. And that's what I really hear when I hear this album. That's what I really interpret from it. The drums are not great. That is one of my critiques of it. The drummer, Colmo, I don't know how to pronounce his last name. It's something Irish, and I couldn't find a proper pronunciation. He got in some injuries and wasn't able to do live drumming aside from 1 or 2 songs. The interlude Touched, the 3rd track, which was something that he made himself, and the closer Soon, which has this really nice sort of breakbeat, more hip-hop influenced drums. And that song is actually probably my favorite on the album, aside from the one I'm going to play at the end of this program. It's like this sort of break from just the noise and the haze. Honestly, what I love about this album is it's that sort of feeling you get when you're in like a foreign country and you're like in an airport and you haven't gotten much sleep and you're jet lagged and everything's this kind of dreary haze and you're feeling happy but in this like weirdly subdued narcotic way. I don't know if I could really make an equivalent to it. Maybe opioids, but of course I've never done opioids. I don't think you should do it either unless you're prescribed, because they can't help for pain. But don't go off there taking it, because that's not good. But it's this sort of warm, fuzzy feeling. It's like you're being wrapped in a blanket of sound. It comforts you. And if you're tired or maybe inebriated, you'll float. You will float. The last time I heard this album, I was with some friends in my house, on my bed. I had the iTunes visualizer on. I had this thing on my stereo. And I was floating, man. I was just sitting there feeling it. Just feeling the music. Just feeling the melody. Feeling it wash all over me. One moment. Apologies if you didn't hear anything for that second. Studio. Gotta love the studio. Anyways. Sludgy, treading sounds. And the androgynous vocals really do sort of seal it. The vocals sort of shift in between Belinda Butcher, the lead vocalist, and Kevin Shields, the main everything. You know, they have a bassist, but she doesn't play on it. Debbie Googe. She was the bassist for the band, still is. And she doesn't play a single thing. It's all Kevin. And that's the weirdest thing. It's like the amount of work and money and effort was put, and struggle and stress was put into this thing just to get like the ideas out of this one guy's head. He has these ideas in his head and he can't tell them to anybody because he can't explain them properly. He has to do it himself. He has this ultimate control, and that could lead to problems. It has led to problems. People with total creative control and not willing to listen to other people, it really does sometimes suck. But I think in this case, it's great. Now, lyrically, we can do some lyrical reading right now. One thing that's really interesting as well is the more I listen to this album, the more you sort of pick out parts of it. The more you can sort of pick out little elements. And you might think there's a ton of elements here, like there's a ton of guitars and effects, but no, not really. In fact, it was just a few guitars, and here's the thing. The sampler, which used guitar feedback, as far as I can tell. And that's what sort of creates these melodies that get stuck in your head. I call them little synth ditties, right? You know, the da-na-na, da-na-na-na, you know, on Loomer. And, you know, the song right now, When You Sleep. Trust me, I did choir for like 5 years in high school. Don't act like I can sing, but not with falsetto, baby. And not for little synth ditties like that. But, yeah. Those are what gets stuck in my head. They sort of act as the chorus. They act as the hook. This is an album with no hooks. Well, no choruses. You don't hear people singing something over and over. There's no, you know, from last week, we don't have like Heart-Shaped Box, you know, hey, wait, I got a new complaint. You know, you don't have anything like that. All you have are these synthesizers. Listening to this through the feedback, through the soundboard, has been the most amazing experience while I've been discussing this album. I'm not even going to lie to you. Because it's like putting it through a sidechain filter and sort of just hearing parts of it that were covered by the walls of noise. So I'm having a great time right now. But lyrically, the first track, actually no, let's go to When You Sleep. When I look at you, oh, I don't know what's real. Once in a while, and you make me laugh. And I'll sleep tomorrow, and it won't be long. Once in a while. Then you take me down. Then you walk away. And the subject of the song feels used, but also in this narcotic haze. And that's what I really feel like a lot of it is. This sort of being tugged at by someone. Being maybe not manipulated, but sort of strung along. You said I do. Oh, but I don't believe in you. I can't forget it. Once in a while, you make me smile. And that's what, to me, really makes this song. And the really interesting thing with this song is that it's one vocalist. You think it'd be a male and female vocalist, but no, it's just Shields. With 11 or 12 takes, he just shoved them all in there because he couldn't get the vocals right. He just pitched them up, so it's like this weird, just the voice. You can't tell who it is. It's beautiful, man. But that's probably what I would really say is what makes this album so memorable for me, is those melodies, those hooks. Other albums do have that too, but I can't think of an album that so effectively uses the sound of shoegaze to really manipulate the guitar in that way. And I'll give you my little personal experience with this album, because words are hard for me to describe this thing. I would really urge you, out of any of the albums I've talked about so far, to listen to this one. Sit down. You might not like the noise. And if that's the case, well, that's what happens. But I'll tell you the story. So in March of 2021, we were still in the peak of well, not really in the peak of the pandemic. We were there. You know, I was vaxxed, but not a lot of people were. And we were still dealing with hybrid school. My school was in person, but like a lot of people in, let's say, Los Angeles County weren't, and it was a bad time. Turns out that's not the greatest time to have to go visit your family, because if you turn 18 and you go, you're going to get conscripted in the military service. If you don't know, I'm Iranian. I'm a dual citizen. I have passport for Iran and the United States of America. I was born here, though. And I took a flight, and it turns out the flight was canceled. The connecting flight from Istanbul to Iran. So they're like, okay, you can stay in Istanbul for like 2 days, or you can just wait. And we were at the airport, and we were like, we're just going to go. Bad idea. Istanbul, we weren't even in the good part. We were in this sort of industrial part. We were in this hotel that was basically a convention center. Not great Wi-Fi, not really anywhere to go, nowhere to see. No one spoke English. I mean, obviously not. You're in Turkey. But you didn't know anything, and it was cold, and it was rainy. And it was kind of depressing, I'm not going to lie to you. And this album and Slow Dive Slovakia, I listened to both of them while I was on the plane ride to Istanbul, and also while I was in the hotel. I was sinking my teeth into it. And that experience, the actually visiting my family for, well, maybe the last time for a while, though I do believe my cousin's getting married in September, and hopefully I can go see them. It is the week I start my sophomore year, though, so who knows? But it really does reflect this narcotic, sleepy feeling. And I like that feeling. Now, obviously, I don't want to sleep deprive myself. I don't like doing that. Good sleep makes you healthy. But everything's kind of dreamy, and everything's just kind of nice. Felt like when I was a little kid and I had to drink a sedative because I had to go through some very minuscule and honestly dumb thing that I had to get put under for anesthesia. That's what this album reminds me of. It reminds me of that, as I said, those butterflies you get in your stomach, that uncertainty, that mental with somebody. I think Blowing a Wish is the most toxic in terms of lyrics. Balloon the Butcher sings stuff like, midnight wish, blow me a kiss, holding on to you, make like this, try to pretend it's true. Show me all your favorite things, show you all mine too. Hold on to your promises, hold on to mine too. Caught like this, I'll turn it in with you. And the last line, last verse. fall apart, my beating heart. Nothing left to do. Once in love, I'll be the death of you. It's like the first stages of meeting somebody, you know? You sort of get to know your favorite interests. You sort of, maybe, it's like, as I said, the first stages in, let's say, a relationship. It's beautiful. And it's weirdly, this whole album is the definition of a romantic album, I would say. It is just beautiful in that regard. But what I like about it is that it's this sort of mix. Shoegaze as a genre is sort of characterized as maybe not being the happiest in the world. More depressing than anything. But I like albums like this because it shows you both sides. And with the way it sounds and the very simplistic but relatable, I'd say, quote-unquote lyrics, because you can't really hear them, it really illustrates the human condition. And that was reinforced when I watched the film Lost in Translation with Scarlett Johansson and Bill Murray the other, like, couple weeks ago, before I started the show. And the song Sometimes, which I'm going to be playing at the end here, in a couple minutes here, because it's like a 5-minute song and I need to give time for my next host, it plays there and you get this sort of feeling of uncertainty, unknowingness, being alone, but being comforted by someone strange and unfamiliar. Because the whole point of the movie is these two people are in an unknown place in Tokyo, and they're both married, but they sort of develop a connection to each other that's partially romantic and partially not. It's a weird thing, right? And it's just weird, finding comfort and solace in another human being. And both that movie and this album to me reflect the human condition. Lyrically, not really. But musically, yes. I just imagine scenes in my head. I imagine colors. And I also imagine myself lied down, curled up under a warm blanket, just listening to the sound fill me. Everything's warm. Everything's fuzzy. Everything's great. Everything feels good. I'm sedated by music, not by anything illicit, because I'm not trying to, you know what I mean? I'm not trying to hurt myself. Shields knew exactly what he wanted to do with this album, and after Loveless, the band kind of dissipated for a while. The band actually got dropped from Creation Records because Shields was very hard to work with, and they cost a lot of money. And he sort of worked himself into a mental corner trying to top Loveless, and they kept recording material. Some of it's half finished, but they had multiple albums worth of material that was just sort of scrapped. And you're currently at 200 watts and you're listening to KUCI 88.9 FM in Irvine. If I didn't say that earlier, ooh-wee. Love me having a short attention span. But the recording sessions for what would become their third album, MBV, released in 2013, started in 1996, which ended up half finished, was picked back up in 2006, and finished in 2012. It released 22 years after Loveless. No one even knew if it would come out. And I like it. It's similar to Loveless in a lot of ways, but it was more experimental. It feels like what he would have done immediately in the 90s. It's not like 20 years of advancements. No, it's just sort of like, this is what they were working on in the 90s, and it's a little polished and a little touched up, and it's out now. It has less songs, but it's actually it's a little shorter. It has 9 songs instead of 11. But some of the songs are longer, some of them are shorter. But it's sort of split up into 3 chunks of 9 tracks, which I think is really cool. The first 3 are like Loveless. The middle is more 60s, bubblegummy, Beach Boys influence maybe, more synthesizers. And the last is loud and experimental. And I'm going to highlight the last track, Wonder 2. The way I describe it is it sounds like drum and bass and shoegaze played at the same time through a jet engine. We have this flanger, and it just swirls your head, and it just keeps on going, these beats. And it's kind of anxiety-inducing, but in a perfect way. And that sort of uneasiness is what I like about shoegaze. There's love and there's hope, but there's also uncertainty and doubt in every single lyric, in every single chord, every single guitar. You feel it. You feel it in your core. And that is why Loveless is my favorite album. Now, why is the shoegaze killer? Because no one can top it. Sorry about the hook if you got it wrong. I don't mind. But again, you are listening to KUCI 88.9 FM in Irvine. This has been episode 3 of Bass Tunes, Loveless, the Shoegaze Killer. I'm Aryan Salimi. and thank you so much for listening to this. We're gonna close y'all out with a beautiful song, Sometimes, from Loveless. Thank you for listening.